We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we continue the conversation with Liberty Nation senior political analyst and long-time host of this radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Now, Tim, we really have covered almost every topic, but there's a few left that I think are fundamentally important, and the largest of which is whether there is now, either is now or will be, a fundamental realignment of America. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's premature to proclaim that there's a realignment, even though Donald Trump doubled his vote among black voters and increased his portion of Hispanic voters beyond what even George W. Bush accomplished in 2004. He had the highest Hispanic vote for a guy who began his campaign with his famous talk about Mexicans and rapists and all of that stuff. He also got a lot of the Muslim vote, which here's a guy who once talked about banning Muslims. So I think we see the makings of a political realignment here, which is not surprising because the blue-collar workers of America are now predominantly Republicans rather than Democrats, which they were for decades aligned with the Democratic Party. Blacks have shown that they're not going to walk in total lockstep with the Democratic Party. They're starting to say, you've taken us for granted for years, for decades, and what have we gotten out of it? And they're starting to push back. I think the question is whether those numbers will continue to show up in 2028 and beyond. But certainly the biggest realignment is among so-called Latino voters or Hispanic voters, because they were pretty much a reliable 2/3 Democratic constituency for as far back as we can remember. But now they came to an almost 50% vote for Donald Trump. It's more like 45%. And that has to sound an awful lot of alarm bells in the Democratic Party. And we've seen now that a Republican has won the popular vote, and he's ahead by 5 million as we speak. It's not a small lead. It's a 3% lead in the popular vote, which could shift a little bit when California finally submits its final tally, which could be weeks from now.
It could be in time for the 2028
It could be.
election.
It probably will be in time for 2028. But I think we have the makings of a political realignment. Will it be quite like 1964, where when the Democrats passed the Civil Rights Bill, and it really wasn't just Democrats, it was more Republicans than Democrats that supported the Voting Rights Act of 1964. That was a complete realignment where blacks who had been pro-Eisenhower and even pro-Nixon in the 1960 election were just turned heavily towards the Democratic Party. And the South became solid for Republicans instead of solid for Democrats, and everything was changed. Ronald Reagan started to realign with his two overwhelming victories in the 80s, but that didn't hold because George H.W. Bush came in and thought that he had been elected. Put it this way, he started the election on third base and thought he hit a triple. In fact, he was just continuing the Reagan agenda, which was wildly popular, and then the Democrats pulled back a lot of that blue-collar vote. So it's too early to say realignment, but there is a realigning that appears to be occurring that would be not as seismic as 1964 and beyond, but not too far from it.
I think there's a misunderstanding of what each of these groups are. So we talk about that there's a blue collar vote. We talk about there's a black vote. There's a Hispanic vote. And I find that, not you, Tim, of course, but the people in the political parties, they have this idea that this is what they are and this is what they shall always remain. This will always be a blue collar vote. This will always be, or the colours, as they call it, because this is the white collar votes as well. They call it the colours. The black vote will always be this. The Hispanic vote will be based on the idea that the people are where they are and where they will stay. And that to me seems, and I'm not an American, but it seems to me a fundamentally un-American proposition, because if America is anything at all, which it obviously is, it's the place where people can get ahead through merit. And it's where there aren't barriers of class. There aren't barriers of station in life. And what you have is, I mean, the world has changed so much just in the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, where people from any background can essentially go into any field. There's no barrier to entry anymore. And so what happens is everybody who is anybody who has even just a mild bit of get up and go about them are striving for something beyond what they have. And there's very few people who are happy to just sit at home and accept their lot. And it seems to me that relying on, for example, the black vote or the Hispanic vote, relying on that because these people are in this socioeconomic condition, it completely undermines the idea that these people are striving. And the blue collar works as well. Do they want to go to the factories every day? Well, maybe they do, but that doesn't mean that they just want the same take-home pay each week. You know, people in the factories, what do they do when they get home? They're putting on political podcasts. They're learning about the Roman Empire through the internet. The whole persona of America is geared towards there's some kind of advancement, whether that's economic, family advancement, mental advancement. And by putting people into these groups and just saying, we're going to do something for this group in the form of this kind of cutting a check, it misunderstands the drive that has brought America to the place it is today, which is the most powerful and innovative country in the world. Sorry, that was my rant, Tim. You carry on.
Well, I think of all the things that have crashed and burned for the left in this election, the progressive era is over, unquestionably. The mainstream media has now been disgraced to the point that nobody will really even pay much attention to them. But identity politics, that's the thing that has failed the Democratic Party, because they put people into boxes and they try to say, well, black people care about racism, so we'll say that Donald Trump is a racist, and Hispanic people need to be appealed to. And I'll use one expression which typifies this entire era of progressive politics, the word Latinx, or Latinx, as it's sometimes called. 98% of Hispanics, Latinos, reject being called Latinx, and yet the Democrats appeal to them by saying, we understand that you're a special group of people and need to be appealed to in a particular way, where it's Republicans, in the person of Donald Trump and others, they approached Hispanic voters, Asian voters, black voters, the same way they did white voters. The message was consistent because, unbeknownst to the left, black people, Hispanics, Asians, every group have to pay the bills. They still have to eat. They have to pump gas. They have to heat their homes, just like white people. And the Republicans recognized this, and the Democrats ran away from it. And if they continue with identity politics, their party's in for a long, hard winter.
Some would ask, too, if they get rid of the focus on identity politics, they'll have no identity left.
Well, as of now, that's the truth. So they're going to have to forge a new identity and find a centrist candidate like an Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, or Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Gavin Newsom, who's, I think his time has come and gone, because his brand of politics has been thoroughly discredited.
DEI has DIE. D, perhaps. Tim Donagh, thanks ever so much for joining us. It's been great to have you on.
It's been a great deal of fun, Mark. Thank you so much.
And that's all we have time for on this week's special edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guest today, Tim Donagh, Liberty Nation Senior Political Analyst. And of course, thank you, the listeners out there in Radio Land who take the time to tune in each and every week. You are appreciated. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse campaigns, candidates or legislation. And this presentation is no endorsement. Thank you for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.